So now we are back and moving on to item number 7, budget work session.
Thank you.
Ms. Small, thank you.
I appreciate it. Tonight we're going to review our planning documents for planning for next year's budget. I have it organized to first review our current budget, so to give you a little perspective, and then we'll go into our recommendations for the operating budget and then capital outlay. Capital outlay we won't spend as much time on, but there's a detailed document that's also in your packet that you'll, after I do the overview, you can review before our next meeting and we can discuss that in more detail at that time. So starting with the current budget, our total budget is $350 million, and it is 79% our operating budget, and that's what you think of as our recurring budget. So not all the revenue sources are recurring. There is, we'll get to that in a minute, but there's some fund balance, but most of that is recurring. We do transfer 2% of our total budget to charter schools, and then 15% is capital outlay, which, that's going to vary from year to year depending on where we are in a bond, and 4% child nutrition. The next slide just takes that 79% operating budget and shows it to you by source. So now we're down to $284 million. And so we're dealing with state, federal, local, and local is made up of several revenue sources. So we have the county, which is 29% of the operating budget. We have fund balance, which is 1%, and then 3% from other sources, and we'll talk about what those are in a minute, but it's mostly fines and forfeitures. So. When we back out charters and we just think about our operations, so now this is sort of a breakdown of how we spend our operating money. We have 83% going to salary and benefits, so 60% salaries, 23% benefits, and we'll speak a little bit later about how we don't control the benefit rates. They're set by the state legislature for all of our employees. And we have 12% purchase services, which is any type of contract service and utilities, and then supplies and materials is 5%. So it's pretty tight in terms. We're in the people business, so it's mostly salary and benefits. When we look by purpose, thank goodness, most of the money is going to instruction. So 78% instructional, and that is it's either the classroom or in support of the classroom. So things at the school level are in that. And then system-wide support services, everything from, bus drivers, maintenance, central office, all of that is, and even custodial services in the school are going to be in system-wide support services. Taking a look at per pupil expenditure, and this always drives everyone crazy because we have different numbers every time you ask. It's a constantly changing number because ADM is constantly changing. But we also have different ways we report it. So our planning for the year that we're in, we're looking at our current year 10,300 per pupil, and that's based on our first month enrollment. The prior year per pupil expenditure that we published in our financial statement. So that's going to have all of our accruals and some longer term liabilities and things sort of built into this calculation. That's $10,778. The state publishes a number for all school systems, and that's kind of what we use to sort of compare by school, between systems, that kind of thing. That's $10,626. They changed their formula this year based on some federal guidelines, but that does include child nutrition. We don't normally include child nutrition in what we call our operating budget. So theirs does, but it excludes any accruals because the state is more of a cash basis situation. So that's sort of different perspectives, but we're all pretty close to the same number. Questions on per pupil?
Yes. 10,300. That's this year?
That's this year.
All right. Per pupil. Last year, prior year per pupil expenditure, 10,778.
This was the beginning before we have all the state increases. So this is sort of where we were when we started the year, and so it's a little bit lower. But part of the issue is it's based on first month enrollment, which was lower. Okay. So than what we're planning for next year. So it's a little bit tricky, but our enrollment has continued to change, and we'll look at an enrollment analysis next, which might help with that.
Now, We still hadn't passed the budget from last year.
Sir?
And they're getting ready to do another one they hadn't passed this year. So all this is based on what hadn't been done yet by the state?
Yes, we don't know what the state will do, and we will be talking about how our planning process in lieu of not knowing what the state, they haven't even done anything this year, so it's tricky. So we basically have a budget, it's just based on the year before. And then, we go first in the process, but we don't really have control over most of our revenue sources, and so it's difficult to plan.
Could this not, and I won't ask any more questions, I promise, could this not, with this pandemic, affect what the county's gonna be able to give us?
Mr. Ravenbach, I wouldn't want to speak for the county. However, I think it's a reasonable assumption that if the economy begins to falter, county revenue is likely to change.
Okay.
And state.
And state.
And federal.
And I know I'm jumping all around because I'm just trying to give you a big view of the total budget. So this is the capital outlay fund, which is currently $53.2 million. That's broken out between the left is by category, so you can see that most of it's repairs and renovations. Technology is 7%, and vehicles are 4%. The revenue by source, and there's multiple sources, but the majority of our capital is funded by our county bond. We also have state lottery funds that we budget every year as part of this capital process that we do. We also have on our books, the state gives us money for buses that we purchase through a lease, but they sort of determine how many we're gonna get, and then they allot the money, but it shows up in this fund. So we never really write the checks, but they just have it on our books because we're able to lease and they're not. So it's just one of those weird state revenue tricks, but it's really state funding for these buses. County appropriations, right below that you see a number of almost $4 million, which the state has given us for capital for the last couple of years. We also have interlocal sales tax that through an agreement we have with the county, we're able to get sales tax at the full rate because for the projects that we are working with the county on for the bond. And so when they get those sales tax revenue back, they're allotting that to us for other projects. So they kind of consider it bond revenue, but we show it separately so that we have our bond just the $160 million, and then any reimbursements we've got that we spend on other projects we're showing is interlocal sales tax.
So now the bond's about to end, right?
We are in the final phase, yes, ma'am. Child nutrition, this is the current year budget of $12.7 million. Most of that is federal reimbursements. We also have sales. They have a fund balance appropriation, which we budget that, but generally we don't have to use it, but it's just sort of a safety net because there's a lot of things that are difficult in terms of food prices and things to estimate on that. But we try not to use up their fund balance, yeah. So it's more just a budget tool, but we sometimes do use it, but they can't spend it unless we budget it. So we also, breaking down their expenditures by type, clearly supplies and materials are much higher because food. So they're operating differently as a business enterprise fund, and so their food costs exceed their salary and benefit costs. Questions on child nutrition? Next is the student enrollment analysis, and I know this is a lot going on, but you can take a look at it later, but there's basically, when we're planning on enrollment, think back to those per pupil numbers we just looked at, there's a lot of moving parts. So the first bar that you see is allotted ADM, and so the state looks at the best of the first 2 months of this year, and that's how we'll be funded for next year. So that's the first thing. Then they come, so that's allotted ADM, like I already know what that number is for next year. So that's our planning number.
So that's that gray.
That's the gray one, and you can
Column right
always
there, all
already
low.
see that for 26,002 students for next year. The best one of two is the best 1 or 2 of these 2 months, the first 2 months of this year, but then they compare that to what they allotted, and if we lose more than 100, they're gonna take money away, and they did this year. They took away almost $900,000, but we knew their projections were high, and we planned on it, but we came up a little shorter than we thought. So it was a little higher than we had planned on, but we prepared for most of it. If we grow more than 100 students or 2%, they give us more money. So basically, they just rearrange everybody's allotment at Christmas, which is tricky.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, so we even in the middle of a year have revenue changes. And so this is the best way I could show it so you can see all 3 numbers. And then ultimately there's the final ADM, and you know, you're only seeing the bottom here is 25,000, the top is 27. So you know, you're not seeing all of the enrollment. So this is just to make it easier for you to read, but just so you can see that variation. And you know, we're looking at, I think this year we came in about 200 under what we had projected, but our projections for next year, and it always kind of depends on what grade, you know, the size of the graduating class versus the birth rates and the size of the kindergarten class. But we really feel like we can, we don't know what will happen with this event, but we really expect to be at 26,000 next year, so we're planning on that same number for next year.
Wow.
Even though we're a little bit shy this year. So questions on that?
Is, when you look at 2018 and 2019, did they have a lot to do with Florence, right?
It had everything to do with Florence. We lost, we were projected that year to be at 20, let's see, I think it was 26,600, something like that. And we ended up, you know, we didn't meet that projection just, you know, before Florence, and then after it, we lost another 400 or 500 students.
So the
we dropped
original-
way down, and we never recovered them all. And so we've been building back to where we were before Florence, because families left our community that couldn't afford to come back. Okay, so general fund, this is just some information. You know, there's a county focus on this because we're trying to prepare the request of the county. We use state numbers. We don't have any control over federal, so we just have to sort of budget that as it comes. But with state, we have ways to project. We have to do estimates. With county funding, once we sort of look at our overall needs, you know, that is the one where if there's anything the state and federal is not going to pay for, we have to request it here. This year, the county increased our allotment 3.4%. It was based on, at the time, you know, our estimated number of students which we didn't reach, but it was 2,900 per pupil at that point. Two things happened. So enrollment fell below projection, but we also had, we also had a mid-year increase in funding from the county recently. And so both of those things together, you know, we're currently at $2,973 per pupil. And you may remember that we share our funding from the county. The charters get the exact amount that we get. So what we're building a budget. We're mostly talking about our needs, but ultimately when we get to the last page, the county funds both. So even though we had expected charter school transfers to be over, they were significantly under their projections. Last year I used projections that were given to me, but they didn't grow as much as they thought either. And so this year, to be conservative, we're going to go with their current enrollment. And if we're off, that'll kind of be on us. They'll get more of our budget, but it just didn't seem right to try to guess what's going to happen at a school that we don't have any control over. So we're going to go conservative on that and stick with their actual enrollment for next year. Excuse me. And then we currently have 694 locally or general fund positions, which is 19% of our total positions, and we kind of refer to those as county funding because most of the general fund is county funded.
Mary Hazel, what categories do those positions tend to fall into?
In a couple of slides, I've got a chart. We'll show you that, so remind me when we get there.
That'd be
We'll
great.
talk about that a little bit.
By the way,
Yes, sir.
if you're going to show him, could I see that also? Or are you going to do this later in the?
Struggling to hear.
I'm sorry.
You can show it one slide.
Okay.
It's a slide that's coming later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So the local Other local revenue includes, as I said earlier, fines and forfeitures. Interest income used to be a larger revenue source. It's very minimal now. And then in miscellaneous income, we might get some insurance reimbursements, not necessarily, I didn't include in here insurance for FEMA, that's in a different category right now, but, and then just small miscellaneous income donations that are not specified for a certain use. If they are, they go in another fund. So, fund balance, we appropriated this year $6.1 million, and most of that, it was for the repairs. And then as we get those reimbursements, that will drop back into fund balance, and we have approval for most everything that we were claiming, and so the part that will be short is the part that the state funded. You remember the state gave us $4 million, so we'll probably have to give part of that back, but we should be able to restore our fund balance by the end of the year, which is great news. Okay, the next slide just gives you a little bit more on the general fund, as we did for the operating budget, so you can see instruction versus support, but it's much more support here because these are the kinds of things that the county has to pay for that the state doesn't fund at all. So your entire maintenance budget, all your utilities, all that kind of stuff is going to be here. And we also have a lot of instructional positions because we're fortunate enough in this county to have additional county funding to help us have the extra positions we need for our schools. And you can kind of see where that is when I get to the next slide. And then there's a breakdown by, the type of expenditures there as well. This is the position by fund. Now, this isn't the complete list. If you kind of go back to our budget book, you can see the complete list and with a little bit more detail. But these are the major categories of positions. So all of our administrators, both school and central office, are on that first line, and you can kind of see, what is state funded in the first column, locally funded in the second, and on. All the teachers, these are classroom teachers in the second row. Instructional support are also certified, but that's going to be your counselor, social worker, psychologist, literacy coaches, or instructional coaches, that type of position. And then non-certified instructional will be things like teacher assistants, paraeducators, folks working in the classroom that are not licensed teachers. And then all the other support and trades are in the last category. And that is the 687 I referred to before in the second column. So any questions about positions?
Is there a particular reason why, and I think I asked this last year, why there's so much funding for the administrators from the local funding as opposed to what the state covers? And I never really did get a clear answer. Dr. Burns, from your experience working with budgets, do you have an explanation?
I'm going to speculate, and I'm sure Ms. Small will correct me if I'm wrong. One of the struggles that districts have is the formula for assistant principals is woefully insufficient. Most districts have to provide local funds to have an adequate number of assistant principals. Is that the case in this district?
That is the case. Over 60% of our assistant principals are locally funded because the state only funds one for every 985 students, which means all of our elementary schools wouldn't have a whole position. If we didn't put, in high schools would have 2 instead of 4. And so there's quite a few locally funded assistant principals. There's also some central office administrators in there because the state has not increased central office administrative funding in, I can't remember when, probably 15 years, and the formula has been cut several times.
I was going to add.
So it's minimal.
Central office administration has been reduced multiple times in the last decade.
So there's very, very little funding from the state on that. Principals, of course, are all state funded because we get one per school, regardless of the size, unless it's under 100. And the rules change at some point, and our schools already existed, so all of our principals are funded. The state even funded our new principal for our new school 4 months. They fund it 4 months early, so that funding started we received that this week in March for the principal for Porter's Neck. But most of the rest of it is local. Any other questions? So now we're going to look at the needs. So I'm going to show you a lot of...
Let me interrupt for 1 second.
Please.
I've been here just over 2 weeks. Mary Hazel and I have become very knowledgeable of each other because we've had to work together very closely. And in terms of process, what you're about to receive is the interim superintendent's budget recommendation to the board.
Okay.
So this is my recommendation to you. This evening it's presented to you. At the end, we'll have some next steps whereby the board then takes the recommendation and you accept, you modify, you add, you delete, so that you end up with the board's request to the county commissioners. And then after they act, you'll adopt your final budget. Although it won't be completely final because the state piece won't be in there. But that's the process that we're following this evening. So Mary Hazel and I have spent a great deal of time reviewing budgets, talking about requests, and this is from me at this point to you as my request for the coming year.
And one of those decisions we made is to show you needs on this, in this proposal that we are not recommending, because we wanted you to know that we believe they're valid, identified needs, but we're not going to recommend, but we needed to talk to you about them, because we think that part of what you need to understand is what the needs are of the system. So don't panic when you see numbers, and then we'll go from there. So first of all, let's review some things we've already talked about a little bit, starting with the state budget concerns. You know, you may recall that we don't have a state budget. We have an ability to estimate what we think will happen based on the budget that almost passed, and that is helpful in terms of planning, and that's an assumption we're making. It may not be that, but that's the best information we have to know what the legislature is thinking. And so, but now we're planning for 2 years at once, because by the time they approve, technically what's this year's budget will be in the new year, and they will probably fund 2 years worth, depending, of course, on what happens with the economy related to this. So these estimates are just that, and they're based on what the state, the action the state almost took this year. Does that make sense to everybody?
Question about that? So in order for this year's budget that never got approved to get approved, the new legislature that will come in, I guess, next November or whenever, or
They'll
December?
start working on next year's budget in
September?
May, late April and May of this year.
Okay, late
Their
April.
budget,
Oh, okay, I'm trying to get all the dates down, right, so they might approve something, boy, we're in March, I can't even keep track of the dates. So you're saying in late April or May of this year, they might finally approve the budget?
I think it's more
Yeah, that's what I
likely,
mean.
unfortunately, I mean, I can't predict, and so I probably shouldn't even
Might.
answer this, but I'm going to. I think it's more likely that they won't, and they'll just come in and start working on next year's budget. I think what they may do will be any kind of response they need to make to the situation we're in for this year, but not all those other things. I think they'll deal with that in next year's budget.
Okay, so if they're working on next year's budget, they will have to approve this year's budget at some point, someplace down the line, won't they?
Well,
I mean,
well, no, basically by taking
leave
no
it as
action,
is?
they did approve a continuing resolution, and so it is a budget. It's just not a budget that included all the new initiatives that they had talked about.
okay, so it just stands as it is.
So it stands as is until they make a change. There were a lot of what they called mini budgets that were approved that did things like set retirement rates for next year and health insurance rates. So I know what they are, and they're really high. And so they're in our planning, and that's actually approved. But they didn't approve some of the other things.
So once they start working on the next budget, whatever's happened has happened.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And we respond. So
Yeah, because it's unusual. I'm trying to understand.
it's fun. Okay, so the things that they did do, they did by not changing anything with the teacher scale, but they did authorize us to do step increases for teachers. So teachers moved through that scale. There just wasn't a new schedule. You may recall that we approved a new local salary schedule, which you have the authority to do, based on what we thought was going to happen with the state, knowing there was a risk that you would be paying for that whole amount locally, as we were trying to raise our non-certified scale, and you did. All that had to be paid for locally, because they never came back with their 1% that we were kind of counting on with that. We already discussed the lost revenue due to the enrollment decrease, and while that is not a significant issue because we plan for it, it's always difficult in planning for the following year. The rate increases I've already mentioned, and then there's some other legislative initiatives that have happened this year in response to the hurricane and the class size reduction that we've been working on. You know, we're in a 4-year phase. We're in the 3rd year of a 4-year phase in plan, so we'll talk about those. Salary goals that the board had communicated in the past, I've tried to summarize here, not getting too detailed, but you know, it seems to be the board's intent to have competitive wages and a salary structure that helps retain and recruit highly qualified staff. We had talked about a phased approach. We can discuss some of those numbers, but we were thinking of a 3-year phase. I'm going to talk to you today about a 4-year phase. So, and then we also want to ensure minimum wages are consistent with state and other county employees. I do believe that one of the reasons why I think it's important to not go as far as we had planned to go this year is we still need to find out what the state's going to do, and because that will help fund, you know, a lot of what we'll do for those folks. But we'll get to that in a moment. We also have safety and security issues that we've been looking at. We have a new school that's opening, so there's operating costs, and the county is expecting a number to approve an increase for that, as they do for every time we open a school that they've approved. They know that the year it opens, there'll be operating costs. And then there's some program continuity issues that we're going to discuss. When we get to program support initiatives, those are things, I'll go ahead and tell you now, that aren't going to be in that final number, but I just wanted you to know what they are. So let's jump in. Legislative requirements. These are the big numbers. So this is, if what I think could happen with the state happens, this is the local cost. So because we're dealing with possibly a 2-year raise for teachers, it's 5%. We're estimating 2% for non-certified in central office because they were going to do 1% a year for this year and next. So we're still assuming they'll do that 2% to kind of make up for not doing anything this year. The employee retirement rate, which is currently 19.7% of every salary dollar, is going to go up to 21.44%, and that's already approved. That's almost a 9% increase. Health insurance is going to go from $6,306 per employee to $6,647 per employee, and that's a 5.4% increase. And that's already, that is a decision that was made. It could change again, but it will be probably at least that much. So, class size phase-in, there's 2 situations we're looking at here, and I'm going to skip that for a minute to the next slide because I've got some details for you, but I want to talk to you a little bit about expanded flood insurance requirements. After Florence, the legislature has made a new law, not a rule, that we have to, all of our schools are in flood zones, we have to insure up to 80% of the replacement value, which is different than the old flood insurance rules. So that's going to increase the cost of our flood insurance. And so that is an amount estimated there, and it's just an estimate because we don't have all the proposals in from that we have requested from our insurance companies, but they should become, they'll come sometime in the next month, and then I can bring you back a more accurate number. We were expecting them this week, but as you know, other things have taken precedence, so we're not going to get them this week.
And so before you move on, if you go back for a second, please.
Say again?
Can you go back for 1 second
Oh,
to
sure.
that slide? The retirement, the health insurance, the class size phase-in, expanded flood insurance requirements, those costs are the local impact due to legislation that is already ratified. The first 2 are estimates. It may be higher, it may be lower, but that would be the local impact due to state legislated action. The reason I want to mention this is you have no choice about funding these things. So your choice is, if you don't request additional funding for this, you'll have to make reductions in other areas to cover this.
And the request would be coming from the general fund? I mean, the local
county.
fund? The local fund?
The request to the county, this is listed because without additional county funding for these items, then your response will have to be to cut other things.
So that $3 million, or close to $3 million, really needs to be emphasized in, I think, our conversations with local officials about, that coming from the state. That is not a request that we are making for something new. That has definitely been
Yeah.
thrown on us from the state. That's correct.
Correct.
We have
Yes.
to.
And certainly if we, if every one in this budget process had to stay on schedule, as we have a deadline of when you have to request the county has a deadline, which they have to approve a budget, and they always do, and you always do. The legislature has to approve a budget by June 30th. They don't necessarily have to follow their rules. So that, if we knew that before you actually approved your budget resolution in July, if everything worked according to plan, we would go from estimates to actual when you did your approval of the beginning budget. We just in the last couple of years have not been fortunate enough for that to happen, so we have to go on estimates. That make sense? This is a chart that you saw last year. We're just in a new column. So on the left is your grade span. The state formulas is the second column, and this is the column that we're funded on. This is sort of class size, but the way it happened in the past was there was a formula, and then there was a class size max, and that difference we were able to fund all the art, music, and PE teachers, and the state wanted to make sure that the formula reflected what class size really was. So now they're starting to fund enhancements separately, but they're doing it over 4 years. So there's 4 years where each year they're giving us more and more enhancement teachers. But then as they do that, we are slowly reducing our class size so that we can add enhancements and reduce class size. So for next year, the formulas are changing in grades 1 through 3 from 18 to 17. Then the following year, we would make one more change in K1, and then we'd be at the state formula. So ultimately, the state formula is having kindergarten at 18, first grade at 16, second and third grade at 17. No other grades have class size restrictions. It's, there's a formula, but there's no class size rules on that. So I'm telling you all that just because it's complicated. I want to remind you, but the way we did our plan and the way they're increasing the enhancements, we're coming up 3 short. We also, as the class sizes get tighter and tighter, we think it's important to have a reserve of 5 teachers, because if we have a really tight class size and someone moves in, you can't go over that without adding a teacher. There's a little bit of room, but not much. So we feel like we need to have 5 extra teachers in reserve that we won't hire unless we need them to make sure that we don't have any class size violations. Because if we do, then that teacher is paid locally. You can't use state funding for that. So we just thought it'd be better to go ahead and plan for it. Won't be hired unless needed. So that's sort of back to, what's in that 640,000, which is 8 teachers. I'll move quickly through that. Are y'all okay with that before I go to the next item? The next item is program continuity. This first slide is the new school operating cost. So most of the time, most of our school positions move with the students. So, you do redistricting, you move students around, the teachers move with them, the TAs move with them. There's certain things, though, that we budget by building. And because we choose to open a new school, the state's not going to give us more custodians or clerical or, more enhancements. We have the same number of students we had before, but we're going to have more sites that need these things. And so those are the positions that we need to fund so that the school will have a media coordinator, guidance counselor, social worker. I meant to say instructional coach. Once I learn something, I have a hard time switching it. I think we call that instructional coach instead of literacy coach now. 3 enhancement teachers, 1 for art, music, and PE, 4 custodians, 3 clerical, and requesting that the county increase nursing services to help provide coverage for that extra campus. But that's not a position on our books. It's contracted services because the county, those are health department employees.
Now, students are going to be moving from the other school into Porter's Neck, and so there'd be less need technically for some of these positions at the other school.
Right, but some of our formulas are based on site. Now, counselors and social workers are based, they're allotted based on need, but this is a regular sized elementary school, so, the need would be there for one of each. media coordinator, it's one per site, regardless of the size of school. And the same thing with instructional coach, based on your current formulas. So we can change it, but that is, now one of the things that we did for assistant principals, that we did make the decision not to put an extra assistant principal on here, that we will adjust as needed between some of the smaller schools and try to figure out how best to do that, and we'll bring that back. But these are the ones that we thought that we needed to be consistent with what we're currently doing, which is why we have this under program continuity. This is what we currently do at schools. You certainly could do what you said and move them from other sites, but then that's taking resources away from those other sites that are generally building level resources, not so much on the number of students.
Well,
And this is how we've done it in the past with the county as we've opened new schools. You know, certainly, you know, it's up to them and up to you, but that's just historically how we plan. We generally, you would see a utility number on here, but because we actually opened the campus last year, we put that increase in last year's budget.
well, that's right, there's already, the campus is already being used.
It is, but but Wrightsville Beach is not. That campus is not, so now, next year, we'll have a whole nother school. We'll have, instead of 44 schools, we'll have 45 schools.
Yeah, but it's
But we had both
considerably
buildings this
smaller
year.
than Porter's Neck.
Say again?
Wrightsville Beach. I said Wrightsville Beach is considerably smaller than Porter's Neck. So,
But we budgeted that increase last year, so. Any other questions? Okay. The mid-year request that we went to the county with, that they approved some one-time money and some continuation money for 4 positions, of which they only gave us 4 months funding because we were doing it, those positions starting in March. So this is the increase to fund those positions for a full year, as well as one-time money for some, and I was supposed to change that wording, and I forgot to do that. It isn't staff development, it is, let me get there. It is student training, student safety training. I had that wrong and I forgot to fix it. It's a safety training item where we have to buy resources for the students to do that training. And so that's a one-time cost. Also, the other part of insurance, which isn't a legislative change, but we can talk to you about it, when FEMA came and if they kind of have a guideline that if they fund reimbursements to us, not reimbursements, but payments to us for damages due to flood for a facility that's not in a flood zone, they ask that we get flood insurance for it, so that if they want us to help them the next time. So we have a couple of campuses in that situation, so we need to add those to our flood policy. We're also, overall, in all of our insurance types, expecting some rate increases, and that's in this number. So this and the other insurance number I gave you under legislative requirements, we will bring back to you actual cost based on policy changes. So this is an estimate. We also have some needs for playground safety as we, keep mulch at the appropriate levels for schools, and some custodial supplies where the cost of the products have gone up. Those are items that we consider program continuity in order to keep serving what we have. There's a significant cost increase there of $127,000. We also, as a one-time item, about every 5 years we do enrollment projections. We contract that out for our facility planning purposes, and that contract, this next year is the year for that, so that's listed as a one-time funding item. And then you may recall we spent a lot of, well, I've spent a lot of time talking about it. I don't know if y'all have, but we have talked about our Tyler implementation of our new ERP system, which is new finance and HR, new business system that we're piloting for the state. The state is paying for all of the sort of implementation process, and they paid for the first year of the service, because we're still paying for our old software for this year and next year. And so what is listed in the continuation item of $90,000 is how much the new software cost us in the future over what our current software costs. So we are going from $100,000 a year to $190,000 a year. So that's an ongoing cost that we were anticipating coming to you with this year. The state helped us with that this year. The one-time cost, though, the state also agreed, and one of the difficulties is being first is sort of they were building the procedures as we go. So they agreed to pay for, to supplement our staff if we did in-house project management. The state board, when that policy went in January, they said that we can't use this money for that. And so we still think, as well as several other counties that are doing this, think it's very important to have in-house folks who understand our system do the project management. And so we're asking to be able to pick that up with fund balance, because it's, you know, so one-time situation is just over 2 years. And then we are asking that position, because it ended up being a little bit more than we even knew in terms of how much it is to coordinate. The person filling that position is currently our director of finance, and I would like for her to move over into this project management so that I, with the current funding, can fill, you know, so we can have a director of finance as we go through this, because this is a major endeavor. We're changing software for the first time in 30 years, and we're working with the state to change how the state does business in North Carolina, and there's a lot of work. And we're spending a lot more time than we even imagined. It's great work. It's going to be good for all of us, and it's going to create a lot of efficiencies and savings in the future. But there is more of a local impact to our budget than we thought. So we're asking for that. You know, we'll make it work without it, but this would really make it work better.
So the $400,000 is basically for a 2-year full-time project manager?
Half of that is for the position. The other half is for the fact that the state isn't paying for the other software, while we have to pay for 2 software services for a whole year, because we have to stay on the old one as we're converting to the new one. So our dates to go live are October 1st for financial, and payroll and HR in January, but we still have to have that other system up and running to continue to do testing for a few months after. So as of June 30th, or at the end of next year, we'll be off that system completely. So.
Would your goal to be to backfill the director role?
Say again?
Would the goal to be to backfill the director role if the director moves into this role?
Yeah, so this, I just thought it made more sense to use the one-time money for the project manager. The director role's already existing, and so it made more sense for this money to fund the project manager, and then the director's already budgeted. So it's just about sort of being able to, you know, we still have to, there's a lot going on, and it would be really helpful for me, I'm just begging right here, it would be really helpful for me to have the director and a project manager. So if you say no, we can certainly make it work. So that is program continuity. Everything else that we're going to talk about is under new initiatives, and there's 3 categories. And so these are things that we would really like to do. We just don't know that it's feasible right now to seriously consider it for next year, but these are very real issues we want to talk about. One is the salary initiatives that are so important to all of us. For the non-certified, we had said last year it would be a significant jump when we went from 13 to 14, you know, because we had so many employees that were right under 13 when we went up to $13 minimum last year. But we have even more employees that are between that 13 and 14 range. And so we also, we sort of made it work last year with our scale, but we ended up with a 30-step scale where the step increases were inconsistent. And so we really think that the next phase needs to be to get all the steps consistent to 1%, so that you don't end up compressing the scale, so that the people at the bottom get a raise, but your veteran folks and your people who have been here don't. Which we didn't do that completely. They all got a minimum increase, but they didn't get nearly what the folks at the bottom did. And at some point we need to move it through, and all of our schedules are significantly under the top of the state range. So for every, whether it's central office administrative scale or non-certified, we're all within the range, but none of our current scales go up to the top of the state range.
Hadn't we talked about $15 an hour?
Say again?
Wasn't it $15 an hour that
What we
had
did,
talked
well,
about?
that's bus drivers, and that's a different scale.
Oh,
This-
I'm talking about, to me, it seems like if I remember last spring, that was the goal, was for
That is our
15
goal.
this
So
year.
we first last year got to 13, or this year. So this year was up to 13, next year was going to be 14, and the third year was going to be 15. And what we're saying is, just to sort of stabilize the scale so that we make sure that we don't have that compression. It would be 1.7 million. I did write down, I don't know what I did with it.
So you're saying stay at the
If
13?
if we did both next year, in excess of what we'd already estimated for state, it would be 3.4 million on this line. So it's a really big ask to go to 14. We think it's important, but we just feel like you might need to spread that over a couple of years. But then when everything happened that's happened recently, I'm not comfortable even asking for this next year. If you are, we certainly can add it in, but this is significant.
So how much would it have, you just said, for the 14, how much would it have been? You said
To
three-
get to 14 would be 3.4 million instead of 1.7 here. And we don't even have the 1.7 in the superintendent's recommendation. But, you know, that over the next couple of years, those numbers are going to come back because they're really important. But you just need to understand, you know, our salary schedule is very compressed. And this is just spreading it out to 1% per step. That's not even, you know, it would be higher than that.
When you say 3.4 million, would that include the corresponding raises for
That's what she means.
tenure, or for people who've been here longer, for veteran positions? Or was that just to get to 14 million for the people who aren't there?
I'm struggling to hear. Can you get a
I'm
little
sorry, would that include corresponding increases for veteran teachers? Would that,
No, this is just
or
not
not teachers,
certified.
I'm sorry, for,
But it would make sure that as we increase the scale, it's the same, everybody has a step, the difference between step 1 and 2 is the same as 29 to 30. So it makes the whole scale start at the new state minimum and have 1% steps. Still doesn't get us to the top of the state scale, but it gets closer. It kind of depends on which range you're talking about. It's not perfect, but it's you know, to us, it's the next step, and then you'd come back and go to 14. Now, what we really want, and one of the things that we're not going to talk about tonight, but we will at a future meeting, is our state goals of what we hope they would do. And we really think this is a state problem to solve because they've already done it for state employees. And then in response to that, our county and community college, I think, increased it for both of their employees. And so we just had so many more employees in this range that it cost so much more than when they made those decisions. But most of these employees are state funded. And so it really does hit hard on local if it's something that you want to do locally. So it would be a very, very big ask. So wanted you to know the numbers, but that is what's listed there. The next one, central office administrators, their scale was a little bit more consistent with changes that we'd made a few years ago to make it in line with principals. It's kind of strange their step increase is 1.7% because that's what the principal scale used to be when principals were on a step scale, but now they're not. But that's just where we've left it. And so this is just adjusting some rates there to make that scale consistent throughout so that there's not compression in the first part of the first few ranges. But we could absorb that if that's something the board wanted to do in the current budget. But even that's not recommended because we want to, probably do both of these things at the same time. The bus driver supplement, now this is recommended and there's no cost, but this is something that the board has talked about. We have the bus driver scale, it has 15 steps. And so when we increased the minimum last year and increased, I think most of the folks on the scale up to step 15 got pretty good raises as well. The drivers at 15 years and above did not. And so we aren't quite to the top of the state scale. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to do a local supplement of $100 per month for the veteran bus drivers. And that would have to be funded locally. But it's not that expensive. And so we really felt like that. And it can be absorbed in the current budget, but it's something that you should consider to sort of deal with that. We had the $15 in our original proposal, when we were going to do 14 for non-certified, we were going to do 15 for bus drivers because we wanted them to get there quicker. But when we took the 14 off, we took the 15 off as well. But if you wanted to do the bus driver to 15, that number was 216,000.
So that's not listed here, but if we
It's
wanted
not
to,
listed here because when we took off the $14 minimum from non-certified, we weren't gonna increase the bus drivers as well. We've included the 2% increase for them that we expect for all
you
state
said
employees.
216,000 for the bus drivers go to 15?
Say again?
Did you say 216,000 for the?
216,000 to go to the $15 minimum.
Correct, okay, thank you. That's what I was
And
trying.
then, we just didn't want, we were trying to be consistent with what we did for both groups. So, but that's the cost. Teacher supplements, several years ago, we went to a flat rate supplement because as the state was increasing beginning teacher pay, it created quite about a $500,000 impact to the local budget every year, and we wanted that back under your control. So we said every year we would bring a supplement increase for your consideration, and so this is a $25 base increase in the base teacher supplement. So not the targeted schools, but the other schools. So 25 for each step would be 330,000. The next is new positions. These are some positions, some were on last year's request and some are new. One was adding 2 safety and security assistants to work with Dave and help provide additional support for our district safety and security initiatives. 2 technology learning specialists, and 4 area technical coordinators. They were on the list last year, but were not funded just due to insufficient revenue. Athletic directors, this is the first time on here, but several years ago, we during the recession, we said we were going to phase out athletic directors and move them for high schools and move them into the 4th AP. Well, let me back up. What first happened was we had 4 APs at every high school, and they lost them during the recession. And they kept the athletic directors. And then they wanted them back, so we said, we'll do it over time through attrition, but we will, when we do it, they're going to be an assistant principal to give them a little bit more response. So you basically get a little bit of athletics and a little bit of assistant principal. But what has happened is we had 2 schools who had retirements and 2 schools that did not, so now you have kind of an inconsistency between those 2. So our recommendation, if you wanted to fix that problem, was to go back to just having the athletic director separate from assistant principals and having 4 assistant principals per high school. So that's really just to bring this issue to your attention. It didn't happen the way we thought. It was taking longer, and it makes sort of inconsistencies in both assistant principals and athletic support. So lead teachers, this is I skipped one. Yeah, no, this is a request of instructional services to add a K-12 science and a middle school ELA. And if you have specific questions on that, I'm going to have to bring Dr. Smith up. But since we're not actually recommending it, we may not need to spend too much time on it tonight, but I'm sure she could provide much more information as to why that is needed. As well as middle schools have a concern that we want to bring to you about MTSS support. And they would love, they all have a non-certified interventionist. They would love that to be certified, whether it was through attrition or I've listed it here as new, but that is a concern of the middle school principals wanted me to bring to your attention. Okay, so that's it for positions. These are 19 positions that we are not recommending at this time due to funding, but we wanted you to know that we think they're very valid needs.
Oh, okay, so this is basically showing us what you would like.
Showing what the needs are that we are not actually recommending at this time. We just think you need to know about them. Program support, we do think it's important to add middle school cheerleading as a sport. This is a really small one, but we just sort of made the decision not to put any new initiatives, in the recommendation. But that's $21,400. We had a plan over several years to standardize the curriculum, and last year we did that for elementary and K-2, and this would be standardizing the reading and writing and science curriculum in elementary, and that would be a one-time expenditure, but it's a significant investment. And so this amount shown at the 458 is just for the curriculum. There's also professional development, but we could take that out of a federal grant.
Who would provide this curriculum development, this cost? How would that work?
These are estimates provided by the vendor based on what we've already implemented in K2.
So this is a vendor that would come in and go through all the grades and unify the curriculum?
So this is specific curriculum that we're purchasing, and then they would come train the teachers.
Oh, okay, so we're purchasing curriculum and they'd come train the teachers.
Right. So we purchase the
Thank
curriculum, but they actually would do train. We're purchasing materials, and then they would train the teachers on how to use them. Middle school, the same thing. We did 6th grade, open up math last year, and we'd like to do 7 and 8. There's also, we've been over several years trying to implement secondary curriculum, developing our own, and that cost is increasing, but there's a one-time cost there for $35,000. There's also a need to now this is where you're just going to need to, I'm going to read this to you because we need Dr. Smith for this, but this is TRC assessment access, so is Amplify running records to support instructional decision-making. So that's all I can tell you about that.
Is that a computer program?
Say again?
Is that a computer program?
No, ma'am, this is to assist with oral reading. iStation, the new assessment tool, does not address assessment through oral reading. There's a way to do that using microphones and a recording, and your instructional staff believes that having a better way to assess oral reading in the early grades is of value.
So without this new program that the
It's
DPI has initiated, this would not be a problem because the old system actually had that built into their assessment practice.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's interesting.
Also, I'd like to continue the expansion of our online course initiative, developing courses in-house rather than using as much use for NCBPS. So it's the same idea, but we do it in-house. And then we are going to have more schools than usual go through the accreditation process, which will have increase for a one-time amount of $20,000 that we'll be dealing with next year. Next is a summary. And I know this is a little bit hard to read, but this is a summary of all of those items that we just talked about by category, and you can see it totals $8.2 million. We would be recommending a $2 million fund balance appropriation, which with whatever, we think that's reasonable based on current lap salaries that you could and the fact that we're going to get reimbursed from building our fund balance back. So I feel comfortable with doing a $2 million appropriation there. But the next slide only shows those first two sections, which is the legislative requirements and program continuity totaling 4.5, with 200,000 coming from our current budget, basically based on vacancy savings or lap salaries, and then increasing the request from the county for 2.5 million. There's 112 there that the county had already talked to us about funding in terms of the safety curriculum for students. The next slide then shows.
Would you go back
Certainly.
Go back one more, please? Go back one more slide.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. This slide identifies the budget needs that were considered. I think it's important for the board to see the legislative requirements, those that are imposed by legislation and have impact on your local budget. Program continuity, maintaining current standards, and then the new initiatives as expansion. I do think it's important for the board to have on the table what staff believes are high priority new initiatives. This is what was considered. The next slide, if you'll go to that one, is what's recommended. Okay, and then the next slide.
I'm going to take the same information and show it to you in a different way on this page, and just in terms of how this affects our county funding. At the top, you can see sort of a comparison of our student numbers, and with every dollar you request, we also have to request the charter share. So the first part of the presentation was just showing the impact to our budget. This shows the total. So our ADM, the charter ADM, and that includes lab school. I just threw it all under charter and lab school. And then the total ADM for the county estimated for next year is 27,547 students. The next section is per pupil, and that shows kind of where we were, what we projected for the current year, what we actually ended up at 2973, and what we are actually projecting for next year. And it seems a little confusing that that's dropping down, but the numbers are shifting between, the student numbers are changing. So for the county request, the next row shows the current county appropriation, and that includes the mid-year adjustment, the continuation part of the mid-year adjustment. And then there is a requested increase. And I had to include the one-time money in that because we'd have to, anything the county gives us, we have to share, except the pre-K grant, which we're going to talk about in a minute, because that's a grant. But anything that's part of the county appropriation, we have to share with the charter schools. And so that takes us to the amount that we would receive if this is the amount you want to request of $76.2 million, charters 4.8, for a total request of $83.9 million.
Mary Hazel, would you look at the request under NHCS? Current year is 76, requested increase 2.6, total request.
That's a typo.
That's what I thought.
It is. I'm so sorry.
It should be
I can tell you
78.
exactly what it is. We
Thank you.
checked and double checked.
Yeah.
If you'll look at the bottom
Yeah.
set rows, county request, come over to New Hanover County Schools, the first set of figures, 76,500,000. Current year appropriation, requested increase 2.6 million.
Yeah.
Total request, this indicates 76 million, it should be 78 million.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
I
I can tell you the 3.5 is correct. I just
Yeah, yeah,
typed it
right.
wrong, and I didn't bring that back up, but I will correct it.
Oh, good, yeah,
Have the
that
correct
is-
one out. Yeah. The requested increase, I'm sure is right. It's just when I was retyping that onto here, because it's not really Excel, when I put it in this chart, I mistyped it. So I apologize, and I will get the correction out
And
there.
I need
But
to
the
s-
increase is a real number.
I need to share with the board that Mary Hazel has done great work, and I have asked her to change some things, which she has done, and done a great job of, which made her a little late, and so she's come in flying pretty hot here today.
We've had a couple things going on.
We had a
right?
couple things going on.
Next, I would just want to show you the county pre-K expansion request. This is actually something the county talked to us about last year, but we wanted to hold off until we knew where we would have space after redistricting. And so we're looking at requesting 2 additional classrooms to serve 15 additional three-year-old classes each, one at Freeman and one at Castle Hayne. The other 3 funded by the county currently are at Mosley. And so this is just estimating the cost based on what we currently do to serve those classrooms in terms of staff and some one-time setup costs, which mostly is classroom furniture that's unique to pre-K, furniture and support that's unique to pre-K, and about $6,000 of that is for some classroom upgrades you'd need on a facility, from a facility standpoint. But the continuation grant request for pre-K next year would be $785,000. I think I got that total right. And the $76,000 for one time. So, any questions on this before I go to capital? Y'all hang in for just a few more minutes? Okay. So, capital. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about the capital process. We had the capital outlay directors pulled information request in from schools and departments, and working carefully with maintenance. So you've got facility planning, maintenance, technology, transportation, and purchasing on the furniture side, all involved in this process with the schools. They consolidated, costed everything out, prioritized, and then we had a meeting with Ms. Justice. I don't even remember when, a few weeks ago.
It was a while back.
It was a while back. And so we've made just a few small tweaks since then. But this is the recommended, well, first, let's talk about revenue sources. We estimate that we're going to have $7.1 million available for this. So that was kind of our target, because we can a little more accurately estimate the capital. Like we know how much lottery we're going to have because we wait till we get it before we budget it. There's lottery funding there. There is the sales tax reimbursements that we talked about, that we already know the number. We know how much we'll get, at least a minimum for the state technology fund. And we know generally what the county funds in terms of capital. We just couldn't balance it exactly to that number, so we are going to request a 4% increase in that, just to cover, to completely cover projects, so we wouldn't have to do like half of a project. But everything that you see here, this was sort of, we looked at all the needs and prioritized them before we looked at the money, and we sort of do that every year. So once they have all the needs prioritized, then we bring the money to the table, and we had that meeting and discussed how far we could go down each list. This is a summary of the list, and once again, this is a little bit busy, but I wanted to show you the list is $49.4 million. That's the total, and we just talked about having 7, right? So the needs are extensive, but we have focused on the priority recommendations in the second column. So we prioritized everything 1, 2, and 3. So the priority ones that we think are the highest priority ones are in the first column. And that totals the amount of the anticipated revenue. We also have what we could do, what we think we would do the second year, because the county does find it helpful to know what our plans are for capital going out, and then future considerations. So we have all those projects on detailed list in your packet, and if you could review those before the next meeting, we can come back and discuss that further. The next few slides just sort of summarize, what the projects are. I did want to mention specifically on the very top priority on facilities is safety and security upgrades for the schools in response to needs that we already knew about, but we had the security assessment to help us determine, how best to start approaching that. And so there's details about that project listed on the attachment. All the other projects are listed there, but other than that and HVAC, all the other projects are smaller, like under $200,000. Technology, what you're seeing is your annual replacement cost, as well as some one-time needs. That Tyler's sneaking back in there again with some equipment that we need specific to scanners and things that would work with the software. But most of those are lists that were, things that we've known were coming that we have prioritized in the past for technology. Vehicles, 2 additional vehicles, an activity bus and a truck replacement for maintenance. Details about the state of those vehicles are included, as well as custodial furniture, custodial equipment replacement, and some office furniture for the Office of Early Childhood Education. So I'm talking too fast and I'm getting tongue-tied, but I just wanted to breeze through that so that you'd kind of know what you were looking at, and ask you to take a look at that before the next meeting. Our next steps, we've done this one. So this is the interim superintendent's budget recommendation, but at your regular board meeting on the 14th, we would like to get those dollars totals correct and bring that back to you for discussion. Any feedback that you could provide to me ahead of time individually would be helpful so that we can bring you the information that you need. If you want an additional work session on it, we could do that on the 21st, which would be the following Tuesday. And then at the May 5th meeting, though, that's your deadline. That's when you need to have the public hearing and vote on whatever it is you're going to request, because the legal deadline is May 15th. That's it. Other questions?
Thank you.
Sure.
Wow.
So at this point, I would suggest that we set the work session just so we have it. If we don't need it, then we can always cancel it.
Well, wasn't the reason the meeting is the 14th because of the Xavier Festival, or is it something else?
With spring break.
Spring break?
So we have it on spring break, but my suggestion is that we, allow for the discussion at the regular meeting, but also allow for the work session. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yeah.
That's good.
All right, so let's do that. So Tabitha, would you mind? Pardon? Is 4 o'clock acceptable, or 5? Would 5 o'clock be?
4 is good.
Yeah,
Well,
4 is good.
I'm thinking of Mr. Wortman. for his work schedule. This would
Board
be his
members,
delegate.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
we may want to consider a different order for the board, perhaps having closed session first for all meetings, if it's necessary for personnel. And if we were to do that, if you would give Tabitha and I a bit of latitude right now, we'll communicate with you what we think the best time would be.
Sure.
So if the closed session's first, the public part for the discussion would follow that.
Okay.
So that we could handle the personnel matters initially. If you give us that latitude,
Yeah.
we'll get back with you on that. And
So
take
we
into
won't set a
account,
time?
the folks who are working.
Okay. So we won't set a time as yet, we'll just reserve that date.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for dealing with this in trying circumstances, trying everywhere. In finance, and HR, it's just, thank you.
Mary Hazel, what would the discussions be at this point with the county?
I've already shared this afternoon, once I finished it, with the county budget staff. And so we'll continue to keep them in the loop, just because of our limitation of attendance tonight. The county budget coordinator is watching, but she will be working with us, and we'll keep them in the loop so that they know the numbers that we're looking at, so they can do their plan.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so now we have worked through our agenda items. If there's nothing else that any board member would like to share, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move for adjournment. Second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in online. And again, stay safe, everyone. Thank you.